Election Night 68 continues. Reporting from election headquarters, correspondent Walter Cronkite.
With little more than 2% of the nation's precincts counted now in the popular vote, Richard Nixon is still leading with 43% of the vote, Humphrey 35% of the vote, and Wallace 21% of the vote. That's a very tiny sample of the nation's voting, of course, and most of the polls are still open in the United States. Here at CBS News, we estimate now on the basis of our sample precincts in the state of Kentucky that state will be won by Richard Nixon, and now we can estimate that in Alabama, as expected, George Wallace will win that state. He will get no less than 62% and perhaps as high as 70% of the vote in his native state, as expected. That puts Wallace in these early hours of what may be a very long night into an early lead for the electoral vote, and of course that's the name of the game. Wallace has his 10 electoral votes now, according to our CBS News estimate, from Alabama. Nixon has his 9 electoral votes from Kentucky. Nixon also is leading, according to our CBS News estimate, for the 14 electoral votes of Florida, and Wallace is leading for the 12 electoral votes of Georgia. Now, it takes 270 electoral votes to win. Of course, when the Electoral College meets, the electors each in their separate state capitals on December the 16th. 270 electoral votes being a clear majority of the total. The number of electors in each state, as you know, being the total of the members of the House of Representatives and of the Senate from that state. If no candidate gets a clear majority of the 270 on December 16th, then the matter goes to the House of Representatives, the new House, when it meets on next January 3rd. Actually, it'll get to counting the electoral vote on January the 6th. And at that point, each state's delegation will have 1 vote for the presidency. Eric Sevareid now for a look at the returns and the historic implications, such as perhaps you can read them at 7:30 in the evening, Eric, along with one of our favorite analysts of election returns and the making of presidents.
Thank you, Walter. My old sidekick, Theodore White, is here with me again, as he was in the conventions this summer. The author of The Making of the President, the last, 2 elections? This is the 3rd book?
3rd one out.
You going to get a real book out of this one?
I don't know yet. It's half an hour too early to tell.
You know that part. We were just talking about what meaning there may be in these returns. Alabama, of course, called for Wallace, but Kentucky for Nixon. And I'm talking about the size of the Wallace vote in Kentucky, which is a kind of a critical state here. Do you read it the same way I do, that this has great implications about Nixon's strategy?
Yes, I do. An essential part of Nixon's strategy was what he called the peripheral strategy, to pick up the border states of the South, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, Florida. It was for this reason he went to a border state itself, Maryland, for Agnew as vice president. And there seems to be the first fragile indication that this part of Nixon's plan is working, that he will carry on these returns those 4 border states and possibly North Carolina also. We've yet to see Humphrey's troops show up.
Well, in other words, then, you think what Nixon did at the convention, which became so contentious, especially his choice of a vice presidential candidate, may yet pay out?
It may. It's too early to say yet. It may work out just as Kennedy's choice of Johnson paid off.
Would you guess from these figures in Kentucky that Wallace will not equal in vote what third parties, the big third parties in this century have done before? That's the problem.
No, I'd say the whole Wallace thing is crumbling right now. There's this terminal terror on the part of the American voter of throwing away his vote in the ballot box. And if it works this way up north, we're going to see a long, long night, as it works for Humphrey in the north as it is for Nixon in the south.
You know, I was just reading a quotation from one of the best political scientists in this country, Professor Rossiter, about third parties. He said they have a place in our tradition, but it's a special one. They serve as an outlet for dissent and symbols of our vaunted tolerance. But they forget their place and invite our righteous intolerance when they thrust themselves forcefully into the struggle for power. Maybe we're seeing that again. Do you think
and
so?
we'll see more of it the next 4 years. There are all sorts of alien shapes floating around in our politics right now.
But you're not willing to say yet that we have basically moved from a 2-party to a 3-party country.
Every indication tonight indicates no. We're staying with it.
More things change, the more they are the same now.
That's right. Well, I kind of like it that way, Eric, myself.
Oh, we're getting old. Thank you, Walter.
We have a surprise from Indiana with some of our sample precincts in. CBS News estimates now that Hubert Humphrey is leading for that solidly Republican state of Indiana, with perhaps getting 51% of the vote, Nixon 40% and Wallace 9% in Indiana, a state where Wallace did well in his 1964 bid in the primaries. CBS News color coverage of election night '68 will continue in a moment.